Welcome into Texans today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and we've got a jam-packed show on tap for you today. Some major news around the NFL early on a Wednesday morning. Seems like they've been sleeping the past 2 days, but this morning we got some Shefty bombs, Schultz bombs, whatever bombs you want to say around the NFL, and NFL insiders just dropping it everywhere. It happened this morning. We're going to break it all down on today's show. And kind of beneath the surface of all these big moves, the Texans made a low-key great signing this morning as well. I'll break that down for you on today's show. Before we get into it, I know we're still on the quest to 30,000 subscribers. We are so close, but I want to show some love, not to the people who are going to hit the sub button, which I really hope you do, but everybody who's hit it so far. I don't want you to, go unnoticed and be like, I am forgetting about y'all. I really appreciate everybody who's hit that sub button so far around the journey. Over 29,000 of you Houston Texans fans, crazy Houston fans, have already gone down and hit that sub button. And I really, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate each and every one of you. So if you could, go down and spam those H's so I can show you a little bit more love in the comment section. If you've hit that sub button, or if you chose to hit it today, go down and spam those H's down in the comment section as we get into the first person on today's show. The Texans made a great re-signing by bringing back Foley Fatukasi. And if you look at the PFF grades, if you look at the stat sheet, if you're a box score warrior, you're going to be like, Foley Fatukasi, what a bad signing by the Houston Texans. That's where you're wrong, my friends. That's where you're wrong, because I said it in my video yesterday. The one weak spot on this Texans defense was at nose tackle. The only legitimate guy that they had, in my opinion, was Tim Settle. Now, on the depth chart, I still have him as the starting nose tackle player for this Texans defensive line, but right behind him, you now have that extra depth. And I would say at every single spot along this Texans defensive line, you have adequate depth. You have great guys that can step in if you're the starter. Even the backups are great talents on this Texans defensive line. And I think Denico Autry is cooking up something similar to the Philadelphia Eagles and what we saw from that Super Bowl winning team this past year, in that you have a just Avengers lineup for your defensive line. I think this Texans D-line is easily top 3 going into 2025 when you consider the 2 stars that they have in Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson Jr. All the interior guys that you have for depth. You have Sheldon Rankins, right? You have Denico Autry, Mario Edwards Jr. You re-signed Barnett. You signed Darrell Taylor. Now you bring back Foley Fatukasi. You have Tim Settle, who's coming off of a career year. This defensive line is ready to go on parade. And, if you grew up a Texans fan, if you were around during the, mid-2000s, early 2010s, you'll know what this is. Bulls on parade. If you are ready for Bulls on Parade 2.0, go down and hit that thumbs up icon. Like the video, because I am pumped for a little bit of Bulls on Parade. I mean, you know who was with the team the last time the Texans had a little bit of Bulls on Parade action? That's my man, Denico Autry. He was playing for the Houston Texans back in these days, but I think this is the 2.0, maybe even the improved version of Bulls on Parade. If you're ready to see that this season for your Houston Texans, go down and hit that like button. Well, next up on today's show, we're going to go around the NFL, because it has been an absolute insane day around the NFL, producer Colin. It has been absolutely bonkers, and we're going to break down all the news happening from today. First, let's talk about the biggest news item of the day, the George Pickens trade. He was traded from the Steelers to the Dallas Cowboys. The Steelers, in return, they get a 2026 third-round pick, a 2027 fifth-round pick, and then the Cowboys, in return, get George Pickens and a 2027 sixth-round pick. So in all reality, George Pickens for a third. Yes, you get a pick swap in 2027, a fifth for a sixth, but in reality, it's George Pickens for a third-round pick in next year's draft. And I'm really interested on why both parties decided to do this after this year's draft. Maybe the Steelers feel comfortable and maybe, adding other receivers in other ways. They already traded for DK Metcalf this offseason. But you would think that both of these teams would have liked to have this deal in place by this year's draft to kind of shape their draft strategy a little bit more. Maybe it kind of was in place, Both these teams took that into mind while they headed into the 2025 NFL draft, but very interesting move right here. And I saw a lot of people talking about the Texans possibly trading for George Pickens, and not a ton after the draft, obviously. They double-dipped. They got Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. But it kind of brings me back to this trade that started free agency. Christian Kirk, we traded a 2026 7th-round pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars for Christian Kirk, and I think this just goes to show you the level of competence that this Texans front office has in making moves and making smart decisions. Because I'm about to ask you a question, and I think it's maybe one of the simpler questions that I've asked you in a while. Which trade value is better? The Texans or the Cowboys? The Texans getting Christian Kirk or the Dallas Cowboys getting George Pickens? Let me know down in the comment section which trade value was better. Which trade do you think was better for these respective teams? Because in my opinion, it's not really all that close. I think the Texans got great value in Christian Kirk for basically nothing. And the Cowboys gave up a 3rd-round pick for a very risky player in George Pickens, who I know the reports are out that he's not going to want a new contract this season, that he wants to prove everybody wrong. Good for him. But at the end of the day, even after this season, you're going to have to pay him a massive contract. And you're telling me, okay, you're either going to have to pay him a contract or you don't pay him a contract, and you gave up a 3rd for a 1-year rental. Unless the Cowboys are going, as Jerry said, all in, I don't think this is a great move by Dallas. And the one thing to kind of tie it back to your Houston Texans with this George Pickens trade is, what does this mean for guys on the Texans depth chart at this moment? I've talked a lot about possibilities of trading guys like a John Mechie III or a Xavier Hutchinson. Does this increase their trade value? Or does this maybe hurt them a little bit in that George Pickens only goes for a 3rd-round pick? And both these guys, obviously, I think they're very talented, but not on the same level of a George Pickens. Does this mean you don't get a 6th or a 7th-round pick for either of these guys? Or maybe does this mean the Steelers and a couple other teams who I'll get to in a little bit have released or traded their receivers? Does that mean they're a little bit more desperate for a guy like a John Mechie III or a Xavier Hutchinson? Very interesting to think about whenever you look at the landscape of the NFL and how teams are going to, put together their final 53-man rosters. Because I know the Texans are going to have to make some tough decisions, but maybe if some teams are really desperate and call the Texans, it could make those decisions a little bit easier because you're not getting rid of guys and getting nothing in return for them. Maybe you see a John Mechie or a Xavier Hutchinson trade to one of these wide receiver needy teams. And as I kind of foreshadowed, the Jags released somebody today, and it's another guy who they gave the bag just a couple off seasons ago. We'll break down that news on today's show. But first, if you need a brand new Texans hat, if you saw the guys who the Texans drafted, they were wearing these draft hats right here. You can get those and many other variations, styles, all on Fanatics. All you got to do, go to chatsports.com/Texans hats. That lets Fanatics know that we sent you over there. So like I said, you get all the different styles of hats. They have the Salute to Service. They have these secondary logo hats. And they have the Texans draft hats from this year. If you want to go see maybe a little window shopping, I know they have a lot of hats on sale as well. You can go check them all out right now. That link, chatsports.com/Texans hats will be in the comment section and description of today's video. If you want to go check it out, let Fanatics know that we sent you over there and maybe, hey, get a cool hat in the process. Let's talk about some other news that happened as the Jags have released wide receiver Gabe Davis, who they signed last offseason from the Buffalo Bills, and it wasn't a cheap contract. Let's just say that. Last offseason, the Jags signed then free agent wide receiver Gabe Davis to a 3-year, $39 million contract. Davis just played 10 games with the Jags, catching 20 passes for 239 yards. Somebody out there can do the math of how much money Gabe Davis got per catch from the Jacksonville Jaguars. I forgot to do the math before I went on air today, but it's absolutely hysterical, the incompetence that we see from some of our division rivals, namely the Jacksonville Jags. I saw a lot of content creators grading different drafts, and they were like, oh, the Jags, they got a A-, B+. Did they? They got Travis Hunter, one of the better players in this draft, but they mortgaged a future first-round pick, and then they're making dumb deals like this, and I know it's a new regime in Jacksonville with a new GM, new head coach, but a lot of cleaning up to do, and it doesn't seem like you're setting yourself up for the future that much. You're putting a lot of trust in Trevor Lawrence as well. And can we just take a second? to just relax and to get a little laugh on how incompetent the Jacksonville Jaguars are, because I know it's hard at times to be a Texans fan and looking at some of the things the Texans do and you're like, oh man, what is it? What are we doing? How come we're not getting enough O-line help? How come we're not doing this and that? And then you look over to the other teams that are in our division and you're like, thank God we play absolutely shitty teams like Jacksonville. And if you're a Jags fan watching this, just know, we're all laughing at you. We're not laughing with you. We're laughing at you. Take a second to just bask in the stupidity of the Jacksonville Jaguars with me for just one moment. Now, after we get our little laugh in, let's talk about some more NFL news that happened today that might have a quasi-impact on your Houston Texans. And I'll tell you why in just a second. Jordan Schultz. The Eagles and tight end Dallas Goederts are finalizing an agreement to keep him in Philadelphia on a reworked deal, as Jeff McClain reports. Subject to trade talks, Goederts will now stay in Philadelphia. And there were some other tweets that basically said Goederts took around somewhere of a $4 million pay cut to stay with the Super Bowl champions. And the way I'm going to kind of tie this into the Houston Texans is because Goederts was the main tight end around trade talks. I would say him and then the Raiders' Michael Mayer were the two guys who were around trade talks. Now one of those guys is off the table in Dallas Goederts. I don't think it'll happen, but could Dalton Schultz garner any interest? If the Texans were to trade him before June 1st, they would have a dead cap of $5 million, a savings of $9 million. If they traded him after June 1st, a dead cap of only $2.5 million and savings of $11.5 million. The only thing is, would any team be willing to take on that massive contract? I believe a team would have to take on $14 million in a cap hit if they were to trade for Dalton Schultz, unless they worked out some sort of deal where the Texans took some of that, contract on. But I know a lot of people are, kind of done with Dalton Schultz in Houston. I'm not in that level yet. I do think Cade Stover at some point should try to, bump up to be the tight end one, or maybe, push him forward a little bit. I still think Dalton Schultz adds value to this team, even though, he does need to, work a little bit on his blocking, problems that he still had while he was a member of the Dallas Cowboys. But I don't think this changes anything for Dalton Schultz. I still think he's on the final 53-man roster for the Houston Texans. I don't think he gets traded at all this offseason. I think he's a member of the Texans going into the 2025 season. And I think, not a resurgent year, but I would say I would bet on Dalton Schultz having a better year in 2025 than he did in 2024. He's still a, reliable pass catcher, somebody the Texans team has been able to rely on the past couple seasons, and there's a reason why they gave him a contract extension, right? There's a reason why they paid him that money. He played good for the Houston Texans during spurts. Yes, he doesn't really offer you a ton in the blocking department, in pass blocking and run blocking, but I still think Dalton Schultz adds value to this team, and I don't think the news around Dallas Goederts necessarily means anything for the Texans and their possibility of trading Dalton Schultz. Now, that's all I have for you on today's show, folks. If you want to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jeremy Chuggs. My DMs are always open. And as always, as I said at the beginning, thank you to the over 29,000 people. It's crazy even saying that number. 29,000 people that have subscribed to the channel so far. We are so close to 30,000. So if you haven't subbed yet, you made it to the end of the video. Why not give me a chance? Give me 1 week to prove to you why I'm the #1 Texans channel here on YouTube. All you got to do is hit that subscribe button down below, 100% for free.